ask you guys a question. Does anybody here know Morse code? I don't. For me, it's gibberish. I've even seen people doing it, like, and it's tap, 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 tap. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand. Well, when my mother-in-law was diagnosed with a brain tumor, it was kind of like that. I didn't understand. I had no idea how this was going to affect our family. I was 29 years old, in the building phase of my life. I had this big new job leading disabled and elderly health policy at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. But you know what? I didn't know anything about being elderly or disabled. So when my mother-in-law got the diagnosis, my wife and I, we just said, well, she needs help. We're going to help. We're her family. We invited her into our home. She was supposed to stay there for 2 weeks to recover from brain surgery. She stayed there for 2 years. She lived for 5.5 years after that diagnosis. Now, I love my mother-in-law. She treated me like a son from the minute I started dating her daughter. But when she was living in our home, I came up with this new term that I started throwing around. Nuclear family. Meaning like my wife and my children and me, not my mother-in-law. How I longed to just have my nuclear family back. I later went on, after my mother-in-law died, to open a home care company to help families just like mine. Then I got a doctoral degree and studied caregiving as a phenomenon of social science, and I started to crack the caregiving code. So I'd like to just pause for a minute and ask you a question. If your life has been touched by caregiving, will you please stand? I'd like to just take a moment to honor you and your service. Now, for those of you who are standing, if your life was changed by caregiving, please remain standing. Wow. Look at how many people stood up and how few sat down. Thank you. You can sit down now. That is why everyone should understand caregiving better. If you did not stand up, the chances are extremely high that caregiving will touch your life at some point in the future. So we're going to talk about cracking the code of caregiving today. There are 4 parts to that. Each part begins with the letter R. The first part is roles. Caregiving involves 2 roles, caregiver and care receiver. If this was a play, the care receiver has the starring role. The care receiver is the first one to step out on the stage. The script is written by the new and evolving health conditions of the care receiver. The caregiver is a supporting actor. The lines for the caregiver are written in that same script. But here's the thing about this play. Neither care receiver or caregiver auditioned for the role. The role was thrust upon them because of the changing needs of the care receiver. In the case of families, these roles emerge after a lifetime of family relationships, which brings us to the second R of caregiving, relationships. Think about someone in your life who has been important in your family, someone who's cared for you. The things that you think about that person, the things that you say to that person, the things that that person says to you, the things that you do with that person, maybe it's your mother, all of that has emerged over the course of your life, and it has a very deep personal meaning, right? Using the example of your mother, if your mother, who cared for you, now requires care from you, things are going to be different. The things that you say to your mother will be different. The things that you think about your mother will be different. The things that you do with your mother will be different. The things that your mother says to you will be different. And it's going to be very hard to adjust to some of those things. That's why adjusting to the changes of caregiving is so hard for families. In the case of my mother-in-law, when she was living with us, I would go off to work, long day at the office, come home, and I'd sit down at dinner with my nuclear family, right? And sitting straight in front of me was my mother-in-law every single day. I just wanted to be with, the stars of the show. I got to the point that I couldn't look at her. I would just sit at the dinner table and eat like this, and I wouldn't look up. That's why it's so hard for families to adjust to the needs of their loved ones through caregiving. That's one of the realities of caregiving, which brings us to the third R in cracking the code of caregiving, realities. Let's be honest about the realities of caregiving. Caregiving isn't sexy. Think about some sexy roles. Scientist. Why are you laughing? Leader. That's a sexy role, right? Actress. Sexy role, right? Caregiver. Not sexy. Even worse, care receiver. Who wants to be dependent upon other people for activities of daily living? Caregiving is hard, not just physically, but also emotionally. Did you know that among family caregivers, they suffer quadruple the rates of clinical depression compared to the average population? Caregiving displaces your time that you would rather spend over here doing things that you want to do or you need to do. You can't do that stuff as much anymore because you got to be over here with the tasks of caregiving. Caregiving also places you in situations that you never thought you would be in before. You'll be doing things and dealing with things that you never thought you would have to deal with before. One of those things is adult incontinence. You laugh, right? Not sexy. In fact, it's kind of culturally taboo. But up to 75% of nursing home residents have some degree of incontinence. In fact, incontinence is often what triggers family members to place their loved ones in nursing homes. I want to tell you about one of my very favorite clients, Mr. Henderson. I was getting my doctoral degree at the time that I had Mr. Henderson as a client, and I loved to go in there and visit this man. He was brilliant. He was a university professor, PhD. One time I asked, "Can I call you Dr. Henderson?" He said, No, just call me Mr. Henderson. People think I'm a medical doctor if you call me Dr. Henderson. So Mr. Henderson had grown blind in his old age. He was 88 years old when I met him. I walked into his house one day and he was in the back on the bed, came back into the bedroom, and I saw him. He was laying on the bed and he heard me walk in and he got up straight like this, erect, and he's looking over in my direction without seeing me. And I said, "Hi, Mr. Henderson, how you doing today?" "I'm incontinent." That was it. And he just sort of looked in my direction and said nothing else. I'll never forget Mr. Henderson's answer to that question. I learned something that day, that here is a man who spent his entire life studying and reading, and he was more concerned about his bladder than his eyes. It shouldn't be that way. But that brings us to the fourth R in cracking the caregiving code, rewards. I learned from Mr. Henderson, and caregivers learn from care receivers all the time. At the end of life, you get a front row seat to watch someone face the spiritual, physical, and emotional realities of death. Care for a dying person is a selfless act. Even amid the burden and the stress, family caregivers report altruistic benefits associated with caregiving, like knowing that their loved one is getting the best possible care provided by them, or finding a deeper sense of satisfaction and meaning and purpose in their life. Thompson and White, two authors that are publishing a book on caregiving, call caregiving a value statement that transcends any cost-benefit analysis. Caregiving teaches us to be more compassionate, more kind, more loving. It enables us to give more love and thus to receive more love. Caregiving teaches us some of the greatest lessons about what it means to be human. So when my mother-in-law got a brain tumor 20 years ago, I didn't know any of this stuff. It was Morse code. Today, we've talked a little bit about cracking the caregiving code. If I had to do it all over again, I'd do a better job with my mother-in-law. I know that, but I can't. So I'm here to share this with you, and I'm issuing a call to action to you today, to get or to give. If you are a caregiver, you're not alone. It's a very difficult situation that you're in, but you don't have to go through it by yourself. If you're a caregiver, think for a minute about one thing related to caregiving that is the most difficult for you. What is that? What popped into your head? Was it logistics, driving your family member back and forth to the doctor? Or was it just in your head, all of the psychosocial stuff that's going on with your relationship? Or maybe it's incontinence care, I don't know. But whatever that one thing was, decide today that you're going to get help on that one thing. There are resources and people to help you. If you're not a caregiver and you know one, who is that person? Who popped into your mind just now? Who popped into your mind when I asked you about a caregiver that you know? Was it a neighbor, a coworker, your sister? Decide today to give them some help. The first thing that you can do is ask them, how's it going? You know, just acknowledging their role, caregivers don't get acknowledged. Just acknowledging what they're going through is validating for them. Beyond that, ask them how you can help. If they're like most caregivers, they're just going to be polite and say, thanks, I'm okay, I got it. Dig a little deeper than that. Ask them about the specific aspects of caregiving that are difficult for them, and then show up. Give them help with that part of caregiving. So by talking about caregiving in this manner, roles, relationships, realities, and rewards, we open the door for a meaningful, actionable discussion about how to help caregivers as well as care receivers. Thank you.